Are you looking for inspiration on a daily basis? Well, check out Deal to Heal Teas. With our inspirational teas, you're sure to find something that will inspire you. Just go to dealtohealteas.myshopify.com. That's Deal to Heal Teas. Get some inspiration in your situation. Wear inspirational tea and be inspired all day. That's Deal to Heal Teas at dealtohealteas.myshopify.com. Hi guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, then I know you'll enjoy the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. I'm your host, Earnest James. And on my podcast, my guests and I discuss topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. I believe that everyone can and should live a life that is whole, healed, and healthy. And therefore, I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with their problems, heal from the pain, and to fulfill their purpose. So check out our podcast. We're on Google Podcasts, Spotify, or even on Audible. And if you want to watch the podcast, check us out on our YouTube channel at Deal to Heal with E. James Podcast. Until then, see you soon. Welcome to the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with E. James. We believe that the relationship between a dad and daughter is one of the most important relationships in a woman's life. Our mission is to promote the daddy-daughter relationship by spreading the voices of girl dads to the world and give love and support to all of our dads and their daughters. Let's get to it. Let's tune in. All right, welcome to the Girl Dad Discussions podcast. I am your host, Earnest James, and we believe that the relationship between a father and daughter is one of the most important relationships in a young woman's life. And therefore, our mission is to promote the daddy-daughter relationship by spreading the voices of girl dads to the world and give our love and support to all of our dads and their daughters. Thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Girl Dad Discussions podcast. If you haven't already, make sure that you listen, like, subscribe, and share to our podcast on all of your social media platforms, including our new page on Instagram, our new channel, should I say, on not Instagram, on YouTube. So originally, our YouTube page was the Deal to Heal podcasting, the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, which is our partner podcast. But we decided to change that to the Deal to Heal podcasting network channel because now we are offering you more than just one podcast. There's the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. There's this podcast, which is the Girl Dad Discussions podcast. And there also is a podcast called Love Walk Faith Talk podcast is also there. And we'll also be bringing you guys more podcasts in the future. So make sure you guys go to YouTube and look up the Deal to Heal podcasting network in order to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So make sure you guys follow us there. Also, our product of the week. As you guys know, we are a self-sustained podcast, and the way that we stay on the air is by bringing you amazing products for you to purchase in order to help us to stay on the air. So our product of the week this week is our Purpose Journal as well as our Purpose Planner, because I believe that we have to journal in order to see where life has brought us and where we are now, and also plan for our future. So make sure you guys go to Amazon and check out our Purpose Journal and our Purpose Planner. The links are in the descriptions below so that you guys may be able to check that out. Also, so should I say today, just like any other day, we are blessed with the guest, Miss Ashley Ann. How are you doing?
So good. Thanks for having me.
No problem, no problem. First of all, let me say thank you for being here because you could have been anywhere else with anyone else, but you're here with us, and so we definitely appreciate it. So, do me a favor, Ashley. Introduce yourself to my listeners. Tell us who you are and a little bit about what you do.
So loaded question. And I mean, I feel like I should have this down, but it's always changing, we're always
Right.
evolving, right? But first and foremost, I'm from like Toronto, Canada area, and I am a vessel of love in so many ways, and I feel like that ends up being coming back to everything that I do. But in terms of like the logistics, I have a self-publishing agency, and I help people write their books, tell their story, turn their teachings into a book. And I also am a cacao ceremonialist, so just being able to create safe spaces and experiences for people to heal and really be able to alchemize their pain into purpose. And I love so much you talking about the planner and whatnot. Like, writing has been such a tool for me to heal, and it's infused in all that I do. So that's just like tip of the iceberg as to who I am, what I do.
Nice, nice, nice. So, for the purpose of this podcast, right? So this is the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, and so we talk about girl being a girl dad, right? So obviously you're
Mhm.
not a dad, but you are a daughter, and we are blessed every now and then to have a daughter to come on and to share their story. And so I'll let you start off with just a little bit about your story and your father journey or your dad journey, should I say?
Yeah. So it really all begins at the age of about 3 for me. So my parents split up when I was about 3 years old, and one of the things that I've always kind of said is that I kind of appreciate, or I'm glad in a way, that I don't remember what happened and
Mhm.
just remember the circumstances of it. I just don't have any recollection or memory. Like, to me, my normal growing up was that it was my mom and my two older sisters and myself. Like, that was our kind of little, like, our knit. And I we actually lived in the States for a period of time, and then we moved to Canada. And yeah, like, it was just one of those things where throughout my childhood and even, early, yeah, my teenage years, my dad wasn't really necessarily around. We didn't really have much of a relationship. Yes, there was a period of like moments that we would see him, but there
Mhm.
was just no aspect of consistency. I feel like that's something that you hear often about. It's like the every other weekend, but like, we're talking about us being in different countries.
Right.
So it just wasn't something that existed, not even just communicating often, to be honest. Like, it was just, he was, in ways absent and just wasn't there. And I had to witness my mom struggle to put food on the table, put a roof over mine and my sister's heads, oftentimes working 3 to 4 jobs. And, she's out the door before I even wake up, and I'm going to bed before she even gets home some days. But one of the things too is, somehow, some way, she always, filled my cup and was always there in a sense too. And to be honest, like, I just, because it was my normal, I never really noticed the gap with my dad until it got to a point where I finally was able to understand and put the pieces for myself together. I think my sisters, because they're older than I was, um, at one point, like, they just had a sense, right? Like, and I was the youngest, so it came to a point where it's almost like I had to formulate my own opinion. And I think,
Mhm.
it came to a point where, the facts are the facts, in the sense of, like, our actions speak louder than words. Like, you could truly say whatever you want. At the end of the day, you can say you love us, and you can say you'll call and you'll do this, but if your actions are not following through with that, then that's what I have to go based off of. So I think for, a period of time, there was a lot of like resentment towards my dad, a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But at the, like, beneath it, if you're really looking at it, like, beneath it is just craving
Yeah.
that love at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's definitely the thing. So when I started the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, right?
Mhm.
So I'm not going to go into the whole story. I always say I'm not going to go into the whole story because my audience have heard it definitely before. But what kind of started this whole journey of me even coming into podcasting was me realizing that every woman I had ever dated was a fatherless daughter. And so
Mhm.
figuring that out, and then coming to the point where I'm like, okay, what can I do to help this, this group of people who I'm connected to, whether they're drawn to me or I'm drawn to them. And so that kind of started my whole journey, either coming into podcasting because I started being asked to be on podcasts before I ever even had a podcast.
Mm.
And so that kind of started my journey. So I do a lot of talking and in the fatherless daughter space, right? And a couple of things I want to point out. So one of them definitely is you said about not noticing because it was your normal, so you didn't really notice in the earlier years the gaps, right? And
Mhm.
that's something that I talk to fatherless daughters about when I'm in the space of being able to talk to them, is that a lot of times because they've been successful, like you said, watching your mom, you know, work hard but always still making a way, and because a lot of times they've grown up with that viewpoint of mom's doing it, mom got it, now they started their own lives and then they're making things happen. And it's like, well, I'm good. He wasn't in my life. I'm good. It's like, yeah,
Mhm.
but it's because you never took the time to look at it, because there's definitely gaps. You know what I mean? And a lot of times we're moving and things, especially when we're successful, especially when we have a successful fatherless daughter, because now they're like, I'm good. Like it didn't affect me
Mhm.
at all. But like, yeah, it did. Even in some way where it may have came out positive, it could be that fact that one of the reasons why you're so driven is because that need to feel appreciated. You know what I mean? And so it shows up in different ways, but when we don't address it, then it's like, oh, I'm good. Like, are you really? You know what I mean? So I wanted to point that out. And then another thing I wanted to point out, when you talked about the actions, right, as a father and showing up, again, saying one thing out your mouth and then showing up. So even in my own story, my daughter, I have one biological daughter, and she's 21 now. But in the earlier years, she was young. She was probably older than you were when your parents divorced. When me and her mom divorced, I think she was like 7 or 8,
Mm.
around that age. But I remember this was before Zoom. This is before all of that. And I remember just being on the phone helping her with her homework. Like, okay, take a
I
picture of the math problem and send it to me, and then we'll talk about it. Like I
love
said, this
that.
was for Zoom and all of that. But just those little different ways that, okay, how can I show up? No, we weren't
Yeah.
in the same house. No, we what didn't necessarily live next door
Mhm.
to each other, especially there was a time when they moved to a whole nother state. And it's like, okay, now we're not down the street from each other no more, but how can I still show up? And so definitely taking that time to, as a father, really thinking about what we say when we say we love our daughters or our children as a whole, but our daughters, and then how we show up after we say it, because our
Yeah.
actions do speak a lot louder than our words, you
Yeah.
know.
It's so
So
cliche, but so true.
yes, yes. So in your story, so we're going on with the story, and you're getting a little older. Where you said, as you got older, you did kind of recognize the gaps. How did that play a role in your life at that time? And then was there a time when you reconnected with your dad, or was there a time when he did become at least a little more active?
Mhm. So one of the things that I also was thinking about when you were kind of saying of just like we don't know how we're being impacted, and until I really started healing and doing that work, I was young. I mean, I was 19, 20 when I like really started to look at this and really started to get into personal development and personal growth. And so I was able to, so some of the things that I just kind of wanted to highlight was I was, although I didn't know it, I would cling to my sister's partners, so their boyfriends at the time when
Mm.
I was really young. That's how I was like this crave of like just any like male figure. I was always craving that, just like getting very attached. And it was kind of like this brother sister relationship, not necessarily a father daughter relationship, but that was such a big thing in my life. And so I was always clinging and looking for that like big brother, and it meant a lot to me. And so then when their relationships ended, it was almost as if like I was going through the breakup. It was, you know what I mean? And I didn't
Yeah.
notice it, and I didn't notice it, but now being in this space and understanding, I'm like, I know exactly why that was, that why I, why I craved that. It's not having him in my life, and this was pre having my stepdad in my life as well. Um, and then, at about 2009, I think it was, is when my stepdad came into my life, and my mom and my stepdad got together. And very quickly we ended up merging homes. And so it was like me and his youngest daughter. And that was also like, it didn't feel like an adjustment. Funny enough, like the only thing it was like I moving cities, but it's not like it was like an hour away. It was really like 25 minutes. So I still got to stay at the same school and whatnot, but it didn't feel like an adjustment. I think for me, I just like was so happy to have this and
Mm.
experience this. And, in ways, the way and seeing the way that my stepdad was a dad and filled that role, I think ultimately because he filled this role, and this was a realization that I only came to very recently, was that because my stepdad fulfilled this father figure role, it was almost like it allowed the space to for me to like open up my heart a little bit more to my dad and be able to have that experience. Because for a long time, through the surface of being so angry, I was like, well, I'm going to change my last name, like doing, saying
Mhm.
those little things that you just like
Yeah.
want to hurt him and you just want to get at him, right? um but it was all just coming from a place of hurt. It was all coming from a place of hurt. And eventually it got to a point where, after my family experienced a loss, and my cousin had passed away, he was very young and sudden. And not long after, my dad moved to Canada, and so now we're in the same country. And I'm thinking, I was 12, 13 at the time, something along those lines. I'm thinking we're going to have a relationship like this. It's going to be like nothing ever happened. We're making up for lost time. We're going to have a relationship. And that didn't happen. And I was so confused. And then I started seeing my sisters having a relationship with my dad. I'm even more confused. And I'm like, what did I do wrong? Like what is happening here? And so again, more anger, more resentment, just all of that building to the surface, and at times there was people that were trying to my I will give credit to my mom. She always said, you can say whatever you want, but he's still your dad. And so she never, there was never that bashing. She just always reminded us, like, we would say things from a place of hurt and hate. And ultimately it was just like, we just wanted that relationship. We wanted him to care. We wanted him to show that he cared. And so, um, somewhere down the lines, now at this point, I don't even know my timelines of years, but after a while, my dad and I finally got to a place where we were able to have a relationship. And so we do have a relationship now. And my perspective is just completely like almost like a 180 in a way.
Mhm.
But it took me taking pen to paper almost and writing him a letter. And this letter, couldn't tell you what it said, but I know it was very passionate. It was very honest. It was very truthful. And it was just, I'm going to lay this on the table. And one of the things that was a big factor in even more buildup was that I was in an accident in 2010. And after my accident, I was completely shocked at the fact that my dad didn't pick up the phone to call me. And just to see that I was okay, it was like a message on Facebook. And kind of side note on this, years later, having a conversation and him and I talking about this now that we have a relationship, in his mind, and this is what's so interesting about our minds, is that in his mind, he called me. But in my mind, in my truth, he never picked up the phone and called me. So it's just so interesting, the realities that we create and the truths that we create from our experiences, and how we can feel that they are so true. And it was such an interesting thing. I remember having that conversation with him, and I was kind of just like, I can't believe you thought you called, and here I am, you know what I mean? And knowing that you didn't, but it created a lot more anger and resentment. And finally, almost like a year after my accident, I wrote him that letter. I gave him that letter, and I think I gave it to him on Father's Day. Maybe not the best, but I remember it being Father's Day, and I was just like, no, I'm giving him this letter. And so I did. And at that point, we had seen each other, but it was very surface level. There was never any sort of real depth of a conversation. Like, I am now at this point almost 20 years old, and I feel like I've never spoken to my dad. Like, we've never had a conversation. And writing that letter, no matter how not nice or kind it would have necessarily been, but it was my truth. It was finally that time that kind of like unlocked and gave us that opportunity to finally have a conversation. And but for me, the biggest thing with that letter was just like, I got to a point where I was so done being angry and sad and resentment, and I was just like, we're either moving forward or we're not. And it's one of two choices. I can't keep holding on to this, and I don't want to hold on to this anymore. I don't want this hate in my heart. And I just was in a place where I was so ready to just forgive him, but really like also let go and have this clean slate. And that was a big factor for us being where we are right now. Is I don't fault him anymore. I think now I come from a place of like a lot of compassion for my dad, and just seeing that, at one point I was 20, not knowing, right? Like, not, I'm trying to navigate life. And he was there at one point too. And so I have so much compassion just coming from that lens of like, he did the best that he could. And then you get into, well, what was his upbringing like too? And, all these things are such a factor. And now I just have so much more compassion. But my biggest like philosophy is, I've heard that saying, forgive, but don't forget. And I kind of disagree with it, just from the lens of like, in order to truly forgive, you do have to let go, because I don't want to fault my dad for the next time he does something and say, well, remember what you did to me, and remember you left, and remember you did this. Like, I just don't want that. Like, what? That's not a relationship. That's not the relationship I want. That's not what I want for us. So that was like a big factor in this too. Is like, I had to be in a place where I had to let go, and I had to allow this like clean slate, this new chapter, so to speak.
Yeah. You said a lot of stuff. No, it's good. It's great. I was trying to keep notes so I can try to remember everything. So first thing I want to go back to, excuse me. I want to go back to you mentioning about your stepdad coming into your life, and your words were that he filled that gap. And I definitely want to give acknowledgement and honor to him, right? So I'm a stepdad also. I think I've shared that, but I'm a stepdad also. I have 4 stepsons. And so it was important to me that even in my sons' lives, one of the things that I always told them growing up was, I'm not here to take your dad's place. I'm just here to fill in the gap until he shows up. And so that's kind of how I balanced it, that yes, I'm your dad, in the presence of, in his absence, should I say. And then when he showed up, I was like, hey, this is your spot, spend the time, whatever. And so that was one of my things I was very passionate about, as being a stepdad. And so I always give honor to the stepdads that come on this platform, because, for lack of a better term, we had a choice. You know what I mean? We had a choice to be like, yes, I want to be a part of this child's life. No, I don't. Right. And we chose to. And so for those who not only chose to, but to stand up honorably and fill that gap, I definitely appreciate and acknowledge all the stepdads. One of the things you mentioned, and it brought a funny story back to me, was you mentioned about, in anger, sort of uh, even making a comment like, I'm gonna change my last name,
Yeah.
right? So I remember one day, me and my wife at the time, we're sitting in our bedroom, and our oldest son comes in, and he's like, I think I want to change my last name to James, right? And so we kind of looked at each other, and it's like one of those moments like, oh, he's like, so his mom was like, oh, you love your stepdad that much, you're going to change your name to his name? And he was like, no, I just want to be able to tell people I'm related to LeBron James. I'm like, really, dude? You just killed my dream. But
Oh,
that,
that's so
that
funny.
was one of our stories. Just bust up laughing, like, dude, get out of my room. So I'm grateful for that. But you know what? I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned about forgiveness, right? Because I think this is a very important aspect of the conversation, is when we have the what I call the reconnection conversation, right? So
Hmm.
this is when the dad has been absent for however long, for whatever reason, and then you come back and you're trying to rebuild that relationship. And so when you mentioned about when your dad came back and him having a relationship with your sisters and still not necessarily having a relationship with you, it kind of brought to my mind that, you were so young when the divorce happened, maybe even in his mind, he didn't have the time to bond. And even if he did have the time to bond, he didn't necessarily have the memories to hang on, which could be a good thing and a bad thing, because one of the things that dads and daughters often face when they have the reconnection conversation is that dads kind of try to come in right where they left off. And a lot of times they may have left when the child was, 2, and came back when she was 20. It was like, but they still coming back like they were 2. It's like, no, she's an adult woman now, right? So there's a whole different aspect in that. So just in that reconnection conversation, right? How important do you believe that it is, number one, to have the conversation, but number two, should I say, to get the man's point of view or the dad's point of view of why he wasn't there? Because I think that's not necessarily the time. I think that's a
Yeah.
question that should be answered in time, but I think that the original reconnection conversation should be more of him listening to how
Mm.
how it affected you. But I'm gonna let you answer the question
Yeah.
before I interject my thoughts on it.
No, that's so interesting though. I will say too, I almost like also don't even remember fully the conversation. And it's interesting because I've really tried to remember. It's not like it was over the phone. We met, like he came to pick me up at my house. We went down to like the water and like we parked the car. For the life of me, don't even remember the conversation, but I think it was because of this letter was that space for me to finally like speak my truth and also
Mhm.
just I think we all have a right to what we feel. I feel like we are so valid in what we're feeling. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to allow ourselves to I had to let myself be angry, like actually feel what I was feeling and be honest about that. I couldn't just sweep it under the rug like that. What is that going to solve? Right? I can't just pretend like nothing happened either. I needed to really acknowledge what I was feeling, what was coming up, sit with it a little bit, even though it was super uncomfortable. But I think eventually, too, just being able to write that letter and put pen to paper physically allowed, like, I genuinely feel like I believe I typed it and not wrote it, but I think with each typing, it was just all of it was finally like being released from me. And I think we all need some sort of outlet. But I have to like agree that that conversation has to be focused on listening and focused on simply just an I'm sorry and just that accountability. It's not it's not the space, it's really not the space to be in defense mode. And I think at any point you can't be in defense mode about, when you're trying to come into a conversation and it is one of those really hard conversations, neither party can be in defense mode, because then you're actually not listening. And I
Mhm.
think what I'm realizing in this moment too is that I appreciated that. I appreciated that he just listened to whatever I had to say and just like received and just allowed me the space to actually open up, because I think that was such a big part in me actually being able to find my voice. Because growing up, I genuinely was not the type of person who could have the hard conversations. I was very shy, even to the extent of being in school, and when you have to give presentations, oh my gosh, it was like awful for me to do that. But after this moment of finally speaking my truth to my dad, I felt like I was truly unlocked, like my truth was unlocked and I found my voice. And from that moment is when I started getting into public speaking. I started doing all these things. And it's interesting, people who know me as a child are kind of just like, who are you? How did you get into this? You were shy. Like, I had a high school teacher who was like, I don't know how you like wrote a book, do all these things, because you were the shyest one in the classroom. So it's like a complete 180, and it's so powerful, I think, when we can finally speak our truth. And sometimes it often requires that speaking the truth to the person we feel like we can't speak our truth to, or maybe it's the person that has kind of hurt us the most. But it's interesting. We've still never had that conversation fully of why, just being able to, but I've said to him, I want to know your story. I want to know your version. I want to know. I'm that type of person who is so open to perspective, and I want to know what it was like for him to grow up and to know his story. And I think if you have the opportunity and if you can create that space and open up your heart to that, it's really powerful to be able to say, I'm going to put myself aside and my ego and my experience aside and the hurt that, yes, I did experience, but I'm going to open up my heart and give you the floor, right? Because that was such a powerful moment for me to speak my truth. Now, what about giving my dad that moment? What about giving him that space to speak his truth?
Yeah, I love that. I love that, and I think I think it plays such a big part, like you said, being able to give the dad the the option or the opportunity, should I say, to actually speak his truth. But again, I do believe that that's a space that you should give, the opportunity. Definitely not coming to the space, um, again, like you mentioned about being defensive and trying to tell your story, doing the reconnection phase. I remember reading a book. I can't think of the name of the book right now, but the author shares a moment when her and her dad, after some time of being connected, like they were back in each other's life at this point, and they were having a birthday party or something, I think, for one of her kids, and they're in the kitchen of her home. And so it just hit her that day, like, okay, this is the day we're having a conversation, and so
Wow.
she turned to him and she's like, why weren't you there,
Mm,
and she said he began to go into his explanation, and she cut him off. And she said, I don't want to hear, I don't want to hear your story. I don't want to hear your excuses. I just wanted to hear you say, I'm sorry, you know.
mm,
And she said he stopped for a second, and then he just looked at her and just like, I'm sorry, And so they had a moment, they embraced, and that moment was the release of what she needed, and I believe what he needed too. And
mm,
but it came from a space of, number one, just her father just saying, what, I'm sorry for why I wasn't there. Forget the explanations or whatever, whether it may be some truth to it or not.
sure.
It's just at this moment, just know that I'm sorry for not being there. And again, later on they would have the actual conversation
Mhm.
and hear his point of view. But I think those two lessons kind of go hand in hand. Like, as a father, when you show up, you have to take ownership of the fact that you are the father. You know what I mean? Like, I can come up with a million reasons why, I didn't show up or why I didn't do something. But at the end of the day, whatever fight you have to fight, whatever, things you have to do, whatever choices you have to make, you have to make those choices in order to
Mhm.
be in your kid's life. and there are even some times with me and my daughter, like I said, they end up moving to a whole nother state. So there were some times when me and her mom might not have been seeing eye to eye and different things that were happening, but it's like, but I still got to show up. You know what I mean? I still have to show up because no matter what, at the end of the day, when my daughter looks at me and say, "Why weren't you there during this time period or whatever?" I want to be able to stand up and say, "I tried and I was,
Yeah.
active in trying." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, luckily, our me and my daughter's relationship
Yeah.
didn't have to go through too much turmoil.
Yeah. I'm curious if I can like even just ask and get your perspective too. Do you feel like, because I'm sitting here like really sitting with it and reflecting, and I don't think I've ever, I don't know if I kind of like let him off the hook or whatever the case may be, but yeah, like do you think in any sort of circumstance that them not trying would have been beneficial in any way? If in the sense, I guess, from the perspective of like, just like the capacity and the ability and the, I feel like we can only like love ourselves at love others at the capability of us being able to love ourselves. And so I wonder if, again, I can't say, well, what if this happened, right? Like it's
Yeah,
just not the life that played out, but I it would have been different, first and foremost, if he wasn't around. But I get curious and I wonder if there's any aspect of, would there have been more harm if he just had no capability or capacity to even show up?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, I think that's two separate issues. Should I, if I can
Sure.
use that word? And I've had this conversation actually recently with someone else, right? So I think it's two things. I think there's never a time that a dad shouldn't try, right? I think
Mhm.
we should always be trying. Would it always work? No. Would a mom always make it easy? No. Would there always, not be some red tape or something, whether it's distance, whether it's different time zone, different countries, like there's always going to be something. But I never think there's a time when a dad should not try to be, to stand in his space, because that's his space. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's his space in his child's life. So I don't think there's a time when you shouldn't try. However, in retrospect, right, there have been some times, and actually, I think it's maybe two episodes before this one. I was speaking with a young lady. Her name is Brittany, and she actually, I think she wrote a book called "Hey Dad, I Forgive You." Right,
Oh,
and so I was having a conversation with her because we same scenario almost, and saying that about her dad not being in her life, and I said, well, one thing that I've come to know and come to terms with myself, that I just give out, just a maybe, is that the benefits of your dad not being in your life, right? Because there are so many people, and in her story, so many people that have striven strove for success and have hit success in so many different areas because of that, maybe that edge that they had
mhm.
for of their dads not being there, or maybe whether somewhat negatively striving for acceptance. You know what I mean? So it's a lot of different ways that it could affect you, that may, in hindsight, you know, have worked in your best interest.
Yeah.
Because I'm not lost on the fact that there are some guys that are just bad guys, right? There are some guys that just not good people. And so having a terrible dad, you know what I mean, might be not be as bad as not having a dad at all. You know what I mean? Like, at least if I
Yeah.
didn't have him at all, I'm able to move forward without the trauma, or should I say the extra trauma and things like that.
Yeah.
Where if I had a bad dad and now I'm dealing with, still dealing with some of the same traumas of, not being accepted, not feeling worthy, and then the mistreatment or whatever that he may bring too. So there is an aspect of it that I
Yeah.
say, just in hindsight, that it may have worked somewhat in
Mhm.
my daughter's, uh, in her benefit of him not being there, but that doesn't take him off the hook for him not being there. Like,
Right.
it may have worked out good for her, But on the underside of it, that don't let you off the hook for not being there and not, taking this being in your rightful
Uh,
space. So I think it's kind of two different issues. But yeah, I definitely some thoughts, that
yeah.
can go into that to see it that way.
100%, 100%. And there's, yeah, like, I mean, I think too, like what I was kind of thinking about when I just listening to you, is also just how, I think at some point we also have to take accountability. And I think that was for me such a big thing, was just take accountability of my life and my choices. And I had to make that decision for myself to kind of do the work in terms of,
Mhm.
when I say that, I just mean from the perspective of, well, why am I attracting these sort of relationships? Why am I this way in relationships? And just getting super curious about ourselves. And just, again, like, this layer is, a lot of this comes back to the stories that we've created and the beliefs we've created from our childhood. And, I thought about this at the very beginning, but that was also such a big thing for me, was that although my dad wasn't around, I developed this whole, like, I needed to prove myself. I needed to prove, because, oh, if I prove myself, if I do this, if I do that, part of even me writing my book was just like, if I put this book out there, well, he's going to notice me and he's going to give me the attention, right? He's going to, like, it's going to be that thing. He's going to give me that
Mhm.
praise that I never had. And so I have to take accountability too, though, for understanding, well, how am I being impacted by this? And then make the different choices. Because I look at, like, the differences between the relationship, specifically relationship with men. And I'm more so mean, like, more along the lines of romantic, and just how a lot of it was like, I was very guarded, very protective, very much
Mhm.
leaving before I was left. Why?
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to be hurt, because my
Yeah.
dad left. So I'm going to be first to leave. You're not going to leave me first. But then again, you get to a point where it's like, well, enough is enough. Like, I need to make this choice for myself. I can't let my relationship and my experience with my dad be the quote unquote excuse for why I am the way
Mhm.
I am. And so, in ways as well, and for me, like, coming up on literally being like less than 45 days of getting married, um, it's
Congratulations.
thank you. It's also, it's interesting, like, the relationship that I have now with my fiance, and just what we're creating and what I didn't have and what I'm seeing and what I'm cultivating and what I'm creating, right? Like, I haven't seen that many quote unquote successful relationships, but I get to create the successful relationship. Like, I can still do that. I still have that power. And I think part of it has just been taking back my power in so many ways, and not letting, like, that experience be the defining factor in my relationship, and what I want that to be. Because for a very long time it was like, well, I'm never going to find someone, so I'm going to make sure that I'm going to be super independent, hyper independent, because I don't need a man, right? It's like, it's interesting. We have to notice, we have to get curious. That's the biggest thing, is getting so curious about, like, what these stories and these beliefs that we're creating from our experiences too. Anyways, I feel like that was a tangent. I apologize.
No, no, that was great. That was great, and I appreciate you for saying that, right? Because all the things that you're saying is conversations that I've had with fatherless daughters, right? And
Mm,
really with them, getting them to understand, like, okay, however, you know, the situation may have played out of why your dad's not here or wasn't there, it's up to you to now to acknowledge it and do the work, do the healing that you need for yourself, not for him,
yeah.
because he may be going on doing whatever, may have a whole nother family or whatever. But
Yep.
how long are you going to let that define who you are, right? And so
Mhm.
everything you just said is conversations that I've had, and I'm so glad that you're able to have it. I want to switch a little bit, right? And talk about the next segment, what we call the getting to the core segment,
Mhm.
which is we talk about the ebook, the four core, which is the core four, which is the core four values that every daughter should get from her father, right? Which is an
Mhm.
ebook that I wrote, and I actually shared the ebook with you. And I like that, you mentioned that you're getting married soon, because one of the things that I've talked about when I am able to have this conversation um, with fatherless daughters is that the core four values that I feel as a dad, as a brother with five sisters, watching my dad raise my five sisters, and in the relationships that I've been in with fatherless daughters. These are the core four values that I think definitely would make a difference, in a daughter's life. And one of the things that I've said, even to guys, is that as important as the core four is to young girls, it's
Mhm.
just as important for adult women, because
Yeah.
they still need those values. They just look for it from different people, right? So once you get a mate, now you're not necessarily looking for your dad to guide you or affirm you. You still want it, but now you have a mate, so now you're looking for those things from your mate. It's like, all right, now this is your job now. Now it's your job to affirm me, to protect me, to guide me, right? And so I love the fact that you even mentioned that you're getting married. So I'm like, yeah, you might want to share them. Like, all right, this is what I'm looking for. You know what I mean? I need these values from you. All right.
Yeah.
So I want to get into it a little bit. And so the ebook is called The Core Four, which is the four core values that every daughter should get from her father. And so those values are guidance, affirmation, love and affection, and protection. And so, actually, for you, of those four values, which one do you think would probably have played or currently probably play the biggest part in you, like will have the biggest impact on you as a daughter and as a soon to be wife?
Hmm. The one that really stands out is like the protection. Um, I think too because for a long time it almost felt like I had to protect myself. And
Mhm.
so yeah, it's again, and we have to do that work. Um, and I had to go on my own journey to also be able to let my fiance in
Mhm.
and be able to take on that role too. Because that was hard for a long time to be able to, because it's very vulnerable. It's very vulnerable to go from like, I've got myself, I don't need anyone, I've got me. But then when that doesn't work necessarily in
Mhm.
relationships, when you're trying to build something and you're trying to create something, um, it doesn't work that way. And I had to learn how to really just allow him to take that role and to let him in so many ways when I'm struggling, right? Like I don't have to struggle by myself. And it's still new. It's still not perfect. It's still not easy. And I've really been so attentive and mindful of like when I'm really struggling with something, whether it be in my business, whether it be in relationships, whatever that looks like, not just trying to figure it out myself. I'm very much like, I'm going to figure it out myself and just letting him in on that. It feels like very safe for me. And I don't think I've ever had that from a relationship with a man, was just having that safety, having feeling like I've got you, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to make sure that like everything's okay. And in ways too, I've had like a very interesting journey with the idea of having kids. And you know I feel like I'm not that type of girl who at a very young age was like, I know I'm going to be a mother. Like that just wasn't me. I always had this like, ooh, I can't wait to be married and have that relationship. But over the last few years, it's been very interesting to see the fear that I have around having kids, and how, especially the moment my fiance and I got engaged, it was like, well, you're going to have such beautiful kids. And I was like, what if um, we're making some assumptions here. Like,
Right.
I don't want kids. And I genuinely had to go through my own process. And I've landed in a space where, now just seeing what I've created with him. And to be honest, I think in so many ways, all these values play such a beautiful role and foundation in our relationship. And it's what has allowed me to feel excited in a way to have kids, especially with my fiance. It's like just seeing that perspective. It's like if I would regret not having kids, because I would, like, I would totally regret it, because it's this piece, this evidence of like our love and what
Mhm.
we've created, what we've built, and like the success. Like it just feels like this like huge success um that I've created, right? From a story that I've been able to overcome, from beliefs that I've been able to overcome, and just being able to then kind of pass that on. Like I just witnessed myself almost like without even being pregnant right now. I'm not pregnant, but just I'm excited to instill those values. I'm excited to like pass that on and to like create kind of like a new story and a new journey.
Yes, I love it. I love it. So, last question before we get out of here. So, the ebook is called The Core Four, which is the four core values. But if it was a fifth value that you could add, what would that be?
Mm. Okay, what comes up, and I don't know if this is like already put into a format of like a value, but it has to be something around communication. I think communication is such a big, honest communication that's surrounded by truth, and creating that space for that, I think is really important in father-daughter relationships, 100%. But just like that's something for all relationships, to have this level of honesty is really important, to be able to speak our truth, and be able to speak our truth in a way where we're not necessarily worried about how it's going to be received. Like we get to speak our truth, and it just is honest. And but I think communication is such a big piece that we all need in relationships, especially in father-daughter relationships.
All right. All right. I love it. I love it. Ashley, I want to thank you so much for being on. And I want you to have the last word, right? I want you to leave a word of advice, inspiration, however you feel, right? I want you to leave a word for our listeners. I want you to have the last word. And to also leave your social media handles and things of that nature where we can follow you at. So I want to give you a second or so to think about that. To my listeners, first of all, I want to thank you guys for even being here on the Girl Dad Discussions podcast. If you love this podcast and you've thought about starting your own podcast, I want you guys to get your copy of the ebook entitled Start Your Podcast Now in Only Three Steps. I have been asked time and time again, how do I start a podcast? And so I took the time, sat down, and created this ebook to make it as simple as possible for you to start your own podcast. And I know it works because not only did I write it, but now I've turned it into a after school program where I'm teaching students how to start their own podcast. So if you have ever thought about, you listen to podcasts, I think I can do it. Get your copy of the ebook Start Your Podcast Now in Only Three Steps. You can find that at ebooksbyejames.com. That's where all of my ebooks are. Again, that's ebooksbyejames.com. You can find it there to check it out. Also, check out our main website, or should I say my main website, which is dealhealfulfill.org. Again, that's dealhealfulfill.org, because my mission is to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with their problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill their purpose. So you guys can go there, find out more about me, and even find out how you can have me to come out to be a speaker, or even to lead a workshop for your school or your organization. Also, again, go to ebooksbyejames.com to check out all of the ebooks that I have available, including the Core Four, which we talked about. Also, the Start Your Podcast Now ebook, as well as an ebook called From Males to Men, which is a male mentoring ebook for young boys, and a ebook called Forgiving Me: The 4 Steps to Self forgiveness, which I'm very proud of. I think you guys will really like that. Again, you can go to ebooks.ejames.com in order to get your copy of the ebooks. Also, our inspirational t-shirt line, which is the deal to heal tees.com. Again, that's deal, the number 2, healtees.com, where you can find our inspirational t-shirts. Put some inspiration in your situation, wear an inspirational tee and be inspired all day. That is our tagline. Not only do we have inspirational tees there, but we also have our podcast merch, which is our t-shirts with our podcast logos on it for the Girl Dad Discussions podcast and the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast also. Last but not least, I have been blessed with the opportunity to be a part of the organization called the Forgiveness Mission. And one of the things that we do, we have free virtual workshops every other month. We used to have them every quarter of the year, but now we're having them every other month, where we talk about everything regarding forgiveness, forgiveness of self, forgiveness of others, forgiveness of the world. We talk about what it means to forgive, who forgiveness is for, just everything surrounding forgiveness. And I think it is a very important conversation and very impactful workshop. Again, these workshops are 100% free. You can go to forgivenessmission.com to register, or to Eventbrite to register for the forgiveness workshop. Again, they're 100% free. Whenever you're listening to this podcast, either one is coming up or one just passed, but you can go to forgivenessmission.com in order to sign up for the forgiveness workshop. So, Ashley, once again, let me say thank you so very much for being on, for sharing your story and your expertise. I want you to have the last word, so the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. I love having the space to share this journey and this perspective, because I think it just comes from a place of love, and there's so much hope and possibility in it. And so if anything has landed and resonated, I mean, I'd love to connect. Words by Ashley Ann on Instagram, and all my lovely links to everything else is there as well. But I think like the last piece that I would leave with, what really came through is just, don't be afraid to open up your heart again. I know it feels at times where you just like, it's shackles and around your heart, and it feels like it's impossible to open up your heart again. But I promise there is so much goodness on the other side of opening up your heart. And I think even just, my experience in being able to have this new relationship with my dad, and now his family that he's also started to, there's so much blessings that you can see on the other side of it, but it does require you to open up your heart again. And I promise, like, we only have this one life. And so I think coming from, no matter what, a place of love is ultimately the best feeling we can experience. And it's euphoric. And I think more of us should experience that and be able to, just get to a place where we continue to open up our hearts and not close it off.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for being on, Ashley. To my listeners, thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, where we believe that one of the most important relationships in a young lady's life is the relationship with her father. So make sure you guys are showing love to one another, encouraging one another, so we can go out and be the best girl dads that we can. Until next time, you guys be blessed. Mm. Thanks for listening to the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with E. James. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and subscribe to our podcast on all your podcast listening platforms. Also, don't keep it to yourself, but share it with someone else, that the Girl Dad Discussions podcast is on the air. Until next time, be blessed.